Hey, Eagles fans, if you're a subscriber to the JAKIB Media YouTube channel, you are already registered to win a pair of season tickets for the upcoming season. That's right, you could win a pair of season tickets for the upcoming 2021 season just for being a subscriber. If you're watching and you're not a subscriber, do it now. Subscribe to the JAKIB Media YouTube channel right now. What do you need to do? Subscribe right now.
Welcome in, everybody. How about the Nick Sirianni, Jalen Hurts era in Philadelphia officially starting off with a beautiful 32-6 victory. And not only their era starting off, but a new era right here in Eagles live postgame shows with the live postgame show with yours truly, Mark Farzetta, the incredible, the veteran reporter himself, Derek Gunn, and the awesome Devin Caney will be joining you all season long as we cover all things Eagles on the live postgame show. John McMullen will be joining us live from the stadium, and so will Eagles right tackle Lane Johnson to break down everything that happened in the game this afternoon. If I can't think of a better way to start out the Nick Sirianni era, D-Gun, than with a blowout victory over the Atlanta Falcons. His offense looked crisp throughout the game. We'll talk about the defensive line struggles up until the second half of this game, but certainly this is the way you want to start off a brand new era of Eagles football, Gunner.
I mean, it was just the way they drew it up, right? We all expected just a lopsided blowout. You know, they had us a little bit concerned early on. You know, the Falcons offense had the Eagles defense on its heels. I think the Falcons ran 29 plays in their first two offensive series. But the key there was the Eagles kept them out of the end zone. They held them to threes instead of sevens. And that was huge because the Eagles went right back down the field and immediately took the lead and never looked back after that. So kudos to Nick Sirianni, Jonathan Gannon, the entire coaching staff. They did an incredible job. As we know, the first few series in a game is the feeling out process between teams. And that's exactly what we saw, an abundance of penalties, something like 28 penalties combined by both teams in the first half. So a lot of sloppiness, a lot of cleaning up. But more importantly, once the Eagles figured out what they wanted to do on both sides of the football, it became a lopsided affair from there.
No question about it. I was certainly impressed with not just the athleticism, because we all knew Jalen Hurts had that. We saw him make smart plays last year. But really, Devin, what stuck out to me in this game when it came to the Eagles quarterback, Jalen Hurts' smarts. What he did between the ears is so many different plays. He felt the pressure. He got rid of the football. He felt the pressure. He scrambled. There was one play in particular, I believe it was in the second quarter, where he was scrambling to his right. He would have let up a sack on a fourth down play that would have been around midfield for the Atlanta Falcons to take over. Instead, he evaded the pressure, got to the sideline, and threw the football away. It was those types of plays that made me think, this is only his fifth career start, right? Because he certainly looks like a guy who's made a lot more than 5 career starts.
Oh, absolutely. He looked like a veteran. He looked like the leader that all of his teammates have said that he is throughout this debate of who should be the quarterback one for the Eagles. And what really, I think, stood out to me about him, aside from the amazing play that we saw from him today, was just how cool, calm, and collected he seemed. He never seemed frazzled. Even if something went wrong, he was just even keel. And I think that really makes a player stand out as a leader on a team. And then, of course, his connections with Devontae Smith did not disappoint. That will never get old.
Certainly not. And Gunner, watching him play, here he is by the numbers, 27 for 35, 264 yards, 3 touchdowns in case, you know, it was a blowout for you and maybe you didn't watch the final couple of minutes. There's a beautiful play to Jalen Reagor to end their scoring on the day. They had a field goal following that as well for the 32nd points of the game, if you will. But again, 27 to 35, Gunner. He exceeded my expectations today, played far better than I really expected him to play in game one, especially only playing 2 series in the preseason.
And I think that's definitely attributed to Nick Sirianni playing to his strengths the entire game. You know, we talked about this all off summer, during the summer training camp leading up to the first game of the season. How would this young man handle so much pressure that has been hovering over him all off season, all the rumors about them trying to go out and get a quarterback? Then they bring in another quarterback. Is he ready to take control? Does he have enough game experience under his belt? Is he Nick Sirianni's quarterback, or is he just a quarterback for now? You know, I think Jalen Hurts got off to an incredible start in terms of showing his organization and other people around the league that, yes, I am capable and talented enough to be a frontline quarterback in the National Football League. Now, granted, it's only one game, and it's against an Atlanta Falcons team that's trying to find its way, just like the Eagles. But what an incredible performance, because as you guys were just talking about a moment ago, when you look at Dean Pease, the defensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons, here's a guy who's well known for wanting to bring blitzes from everywhere. Number one, the offensive line did an incredible job of picking up the blitzes and the running backs as well. Miles Sanders, Kenneth Gainwell did an incredible job picking up the blitzes. And when the Falcons tried to bring the odd man pressure against Jalen Hurts, what an incredible job he did of sidestepping the pressure, stepping up in the pressure, or taking off and running. And I love how Sirianni kept the Falcons defense off guard when he called design running plays for Jalen Hurts as well. You know, use every attribute this young man has. He may not have the greatest arm, but he has an accurate arm. He can get the ball deep when he has to. He may not have the strongest arm of the National Football League. He may not be the best overall gifted quarterback in the National Football League. But for this particular offense, he's exactly what Nick Sirianni needs in his offense right now. A mobile quarterback who can run these RPOs and keep a defense guessing. And, man, he ran it to perfection today. Took a little while to get it going, get in the rhythm. But once he did, man, he ran it to perfection.
He really did. And I think we finally got to see what we were wanting to see from Nick Sirianni in terms of what type of offense is he really going to run? Because, Gunnar, you and I were talking about this last Friday.
Yeah.
When it comes to Nick Sirianni, we have never had less information. Even with the Andy Reid era, we've never had less information going into a season. Chip Kelly, we knew what he was going to do from Oregon. We knew what Doug Peters was going to do. It was going to be basically Andy Reid 2.0 West Coast offense. And we saw a lot of that. When it came to what we saw from Andy Reid, we knew West Coast offense as well coming from Paul Holmgren. This is the type of thing right now, or Mike Holmgren, excuse me. This is the type of thing we wanted to see from Nick Sirianni. There were a lot of different options offensively speaking. It was everything but vanilla. They had exotic packages going in there with the formations that they had throughout this game. They had 2 tight end sets, plenty of them until Zach Ertz got hurt for a little bit with the hamstring. You also saw a lot of plays to Devontae Smith as this game went on, and different runs out of the backfield as well. It was a wide variety of ways to hurt a defense, and that's what I was really hoping I would see from Nick Sirianni, because how many times through the end of Andy Reid, through Chip Kelly, and even with Doug Peterson, did we talk about predictability? In this game, I didn't feel like the Eagles offense had a lot of predictability. It was a very, very strong first impression from Nick Sirianni and his offense.
Well, you know, you look at how he came out of the gate. You know, he throws a bubble screen to Quez Watkins on one side, comes right back, throws another bubble screen to Quez Watkins on the other side. The first 3 plays of the game were to Quez Watkins. You know, and then after that, that's when he started utilizing all of his assets. Beautiful touchdown throw to Devontae Smith. To get him acclimated to the National Football League. His first catch ends up being a touchdown in the National Football League. And then once they got the intermediate passing game going, that opened up the run game. And, of course, by the second half, the offensive line simply dominated. And then the defensive line began to dominate. You know, Atlanta likes to play more of a smallish type scheme when it comes to defensive linemen. They want the smaller, quick linemen. Well, that can be an asset. It can also be a liability, because when you're playing against tackle to tackle, much bigger offensive linemen, especially when they're agile and mobile like this Eagles offensive line, as we saw, the Eagles, once they asserted themselves in the trenches, it allowed Jalen Hurts, the running game, the passing game, to do a lot more. And you can tell by the end of that, by the midway of the fourth quarter, that Falcons defense was dog tired the way the Eagles were controlling the offensive line of scrimmage.
I loved it. Hey, Devin, do you remember that Nick Sirianni introductory press conference? Because it's really starting to seem like a very, very distant memory to me. Because the guy played, he coached a very confident football game as well. 2 fourth-down attempts at conversions there. They didn't work out. I won't say they were the best play calls for those 4th downs, but still went for it on 2 separate occasions on 4th down. Some questionable calls there. But still, this was a guy that played, I thought, he called a very confident game. And on top of all that, called plays that I thought very much fit the talent that he had out there on the football field.
100%. And I remember, you kind of mentioned Nick Sirianni being in his element when he's coaching. And I think we definitely saw that today. I mean, we truly had no idea what to expect. It was kind of a judgment day, like no precedent from the coaching staff. This team feels like an entirely new team in a good way. And I actually posed this question on Twitter because there were a lot of surprises, good surprises today in this game. But I wanted to know what everyone thought was the biggest. And aside from our punter kind of standing out, which also was a surprise, everyone said the coaching staff and the play calling. Everyone was pleasantly surprised. I think based on, you mentioned Nick Sirianni's press conferences, he can be a little bit nervous when he's in front of the media. Sometimes people didn't know how he'd perform under pressure. And I'm, for one, am extremely happy with his play calling and just the way that he also seemed to emulate that cool, calm collectedness that I mentioned about Jalen Hurts.
It's funny you mentioned Nick Sirianni from April to now. Take this into consideration. Here's a guy who comes from a medium-sized market like Indianapolis, where you might have 15, 25 various media members in your face. And even though a lot of this was by way of video, you come to a market like Philadelphia where you have 50, 60, 70 people coming at you from all different directions. You've never been a head coach before in the National Football League. I guarantee you, before he stepped to that podium back in April, Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, the PR staff sat down with him and groomed him because it was a tense situation back then. They had just lost the franchise quarterback recently. You just surprisingly lost your head coach that had won you your first ever Super Bowl. So it was an incredible transition period. And you didn't want the new coach to come out of the gate and say something that could come back to haunt him later. So I guarantee you he was guarded in a lot of his statements. And even as we move forward now, he's still guarded in some ways. Because, you're the city, as you guys know, if you get one little sliver of information and it's said the wrong way or put out there the wrong way, all of a sudden it catches on like wildfire and is told 20 different ways from the actual truth. So, but he has loosened up. We start to see his personality a little bit more. He's wearing the T-shirts and practices of his players. Players that I've talked to have said he's become this player's coach. And they like that breath of fresh air about him, this new aura that he brings about him. And obviously they love this new aura of defense, an offense that they're playing right now, because it worked well against the Atlanta Falcons today.
It certainly did. And real quick, before we talk to Lane Johnson, who's going to be joining us coming up a little bit later in the show, as he will after every single Eagles game throughout this season, he'll be joining the live post-game show right here. I do want to tell you, this is presented exclusively by Ocean Casino Resort. Go for the win. Go Birds. Ocean Casino Resort. You mentioned the defense. Devin, you also asked, who was really jumping out to you, who was impressing, and people talking about the coaching staff. Well, Gunnar, on your note, talking about the defense, I was concerned in the first half of this football game. 100 yards on the ground. This defensive line that was supposed to be the strong suit of this defense seemed to be failing epically. There was one person that stuck out to me on a positive note, but in general, how many times did you see little cutback runs by Evans in this game, for instance, that was cutting back into the middle of the field and gaining 20 yards per clip? That's what it seemed like throughout this game. And it was consistently. We were looking at this defensive line going into it with Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave, Brandon Graham, and all that. And constantly they were getting blown off the football. And constantly you saw Jonathan Gannon on top of that call schemes where you only had 3 down linemen. What happened to the 4? I know it wasn't supposed to be a strict 4-3 defense, but that was a little extreme for my liking, what we saw in that first half.
Well, earlier in the week, Brandon Graham on my Gun on One podcast had told me, when I asked him, I said, how many plays normally does it take you to figure out what the opposition is doing? He said normally 15, 20 plays. Well, obviously it took a little bit longer than that this time around. They were on their heels, and they were getting gouged in a running game. You're right. Atlanta had over 100 yards rushing in the first half, but look what they finished with, $124 total. So Jonathan Gannon and these guys made the adjustments. They had better gap control. The linebackers came up and filled the gaps a lot better. Even the secondary came down in the box and helped fill the gaps a lot better, and basically made Atlanta one-dimensional. And if Atlanta couldn't run the football, obviously they didn't have enough explosive weapons to exploit the Eagles on the back end in the passing game. So kudos to Jonathan Gannon and that crew for making the necessary adjustments, because once they made Atlanta one-dimensional, they had Atlanta right where they wanted them. Matt Ryan is not a mobile quarterback. We all know that. And once they took that run game from him, he was a sitting target. They could lay back on the pass. The front four guys were getting enough pressure and keeping Matt Ryan in a corral long enough to where you could drop more guys into coverage, and there was very few lanes for them. If you looked at a lot of passes that Matt Ryan was throwing, he was throwing a lot of out routes. Why? Because there was nothing open in the middle of the field. There was nothing open deep down the sidelines because everything was blanketed because the Eagles were able to have extra men in coverage.
It was really unreal, the night and day performance from the first half and the second half with how this Eagles defensive line played. But there's one person I want to talk about that I thought on the defensive line played a complete four quarters, right?
Yeah.
Javon Hargrave, a number of occasions on this team. When we were just talking about Mike Davis, for instance, with his big gain in the first half and the multiple big gains that he had.
Right.
One guy that really stuck out to me was Javon Hargrave, simply because you even get down to that third and goal situation where they ended up settling for 3 points.
Right.
The play was later broken up by Derek Barnett on the outside. The guy that put the center on roller skates was Javon Hargrave, who played the nose tackle in that situation, which I thought was interesting, again, in a goal line type of play, but they went with it and it ended up working. He got the pressure on Matt Ryan, forced the pass earlier in the series there to Mike, or in the play rather, to Mike Davis, and they were able to break up that play. Hargrave played phenomenal, I thought, through 4 quarters, and when you look at the entire defensive line, I think that's the one guy you could say played a solid full game. Not a solid second half, but a solid full game.
He played the type of game today that we were expecting to see from him a year ago, the type of game that we were expecting to see from him when he played with the Steelers. He is a great penetrator. When he's healthy, he is great at collapsing the interior offensive line and being a disruptive factor. When you can get 2 D tackles like a Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave who can get pushed like that back up the middle, it affects the running game, obviously, but more importantly, it can affect the timing of the passing game. When your offensive linemen are moving backwards instead of forwards back into the quarterback's line of view, and also forcing the quarterback to step off of his spot where he wants to make certain throws. Those are all disruptive plays that play to the strength of a defense. And we got to see that from Javon Hargrave in this game today. And hopefully this is just a small sample of things to come, keeping him healthy, keeping Fletcher Cox healthy, because if that is the case, this Eagles defensive front is going to be formidable all season long. They won't have to do a lot of blitzing. If they can get that consistent pressure from just the 4 guys up front, it gives the back 7 a lot of opportunities to play a lot of different games, to generate a lot of different disguises to try to fool a lot of quarterbacks they're going to face.
If I was looking at this one game expecting to see one thing from the defense, it was going to be a couple of blitzes.
Right.
I don't think Devin, Gunner, did you guys see a lot of blitzes? I just saw everybody depending on, again, the old front 4, which is what Jim Schwartz was criticized a lot throughout his tenure here in Philadelphia. I saw them, again, just relying on the defensive line, especially really throughout the game. I didn't see any overly aggressive defensive scheme to try to do anything. The only adjustment that we all saw was stacking the box with 8 guys consistently in that second half.
Well, I want to know, because you mentioned Hargrave stood out in a good way, but on the other end of the spectrum, especially in that first quarter, Avonte Maddox wasn't playing his best. Eric Wilson wasn't playing his best. So I want to get Deegan, I'll ask you this. Is this concerning at all to you, moving forward? Because, they eventually got it together, but we were also playing the Falcons, not to discredit that win at all. But I don't know if I have a lot of faith in what I saw, especially from Avonte Maddox.
I think when you talk about an Avonte Maddox, here's a kid who's going to give you 100% every time he steps out on the football field. And he is a good cover guy. His only real negative is he's shorter than most guys he's going to cover. He's only about 5'9", 5'10", with his cleats on. And when you're going up against the tight ends and wide receivers who are the 6'2", 6'3", you're already at a disadvantage. But he's fearless in terms of being a competitor. And I think that helps him in terms of enhancing his confidence. He's going to win his battles. He's going to lose his battles. You're just going to have to take it with a grain of salt. Unless somebody taller emerges on that Eagles roster that can give them that height that they can combat. And let's face it, there are a number of DBs, both safeties and cornerbacks in the National Football League that are in that 5'10" or 5'11" range. It's about technique and desire. Now, he has that. Avonte has that desire. He has the technique. He's just going to have to win as many battles as he can. He's going to get called with a few pass interference calls, and he's going to win his share of battles as well. It's just the nature of what his God-given talent that he was given.
All right, when we come back, great question, great answer, Gunner, right there. When we come back here on Live Post Game Show, we're going to take a look at one more member of that Eagles defense that definitely stood out in today's game. Seems to always be around the football. Well, we'll have more when we come back here on Live Post Game Show with Mark Farzetta, Devin Caney, and D. Gunn. Coming up right